Welcome to our Wild West story. Where are you watching from? State and comment and subscribe. Let's dive in. The sun blazed low over the horizon, painting the desert sky in streaks of crimson and gold as the town of Redemption Ridge stirred with the end of another day. Wagons creaked along the main street, children darted past with laughter too fragile for this hard land, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the baker's door. To any stranger, it looked like just another frontier town clinging to survival in the unforgiving West. But for Jonah Steele, the man who now stood behind the pulpit of the small white chapel, it was meant to be more. It was meant to be salvation. Jonah had once been a different man. His hands, now folded in prayer, had once been stained with gunpowder and blood. He had ridden with outlaws, fought in duels that left graves behind him, and earned a reputation that whispered through saloons from Kansas to New Mexico. The Black Rider. But Jonah had left that life buried, or so he prayed. When he first rode into Redemption Ridge with nothing but a worn Bible and an old revolver wrapped in cloth, the townsfolk had welcomed him with cautious hope. A preacher was a rare blessing on the frontier, and Jonah had been determined to live as a man of God. Yet even as he preached of peace, Jonah felt the weight of his past like iron shackles. Some evenings, when the desert wind howled through the cracks of his chapel, he would grip that hidden revolver in the dark, his soul trembling at the thought that the day would come when he would need it again. That evening, as the church bell rang and families gathered for prayer, Jonah felt an unease he could not name. A dust cloud rose on the horizon, riders moving fast, too many for travelers, too wild for settlers. The sound of distant hooves thundered closer with each passing second. Jonah's hands trembled as he closed his Bible. Something dark was coming to Redemption Ridge, and Jonah knew, deep in his bones, that his past would not stay buried for long. The next morning, Redemption Ridge awoke to restless murmurs. The dust clouds spotted the night before had vanished into the horizon, but the memory of it lingered like smoke after a fire. Farmers feeding their cattle glanced nervously at the open desert. The blacksmith hammered steel with a distracted rhythm, and inside the rusty spur saloon, whispers spread faster than spilled whiskey. "Riders," one ranch hand muttered over a glass. "Ain't no settlers ride that fast. Outlaws, mark my words." "Maybe the McGraw gang," another said, lowering his voice. "Heard they've been tearing through mining camps. Mean bastards, burned a whole town to ash in Arizona." Jonah Steele entered the saloon not for drink, but for bread and flour from the store beside it. Still, when he stepped through the swinging doors to cross, silence fell for just a moment. Conversation stalled. A few sets of eyes followed him with suspicion, others with a quiet kind of awe. There were rumors in Redemption Ridge, rumors that their preacher wasn't always a preacher, that once, long ago, he was faster with a Colt than any man alive, that he'd left behind a trail of bodies stretching across 3 territories. Jonah never confirmed nor denied such talk. He only carried his Bible and preached peace. But the way his shoulders squared, the way his eyes swept the room with quiet calculation, men noticed, and some believed. As he exited, he overheard the hushed words of 2 drifters at a table. "Reckon if them outlaws come riding, that preacher'll show his true face." Jonah's jaw tightened. He wanted to be a man of faith, not blood. Yet the whispers followed him like shadows. That night, while the town quieted under a blanket of stars, Jonah stood alone in the chapel, staring at the revolver hidden beneath the pulpit floorboards. His fingers itched to draw it, to feel its weight again. But instead he clenched his hands and whispered, "Lord, keep me from the gun. Let peace reign here." Outside in the distance, the faint echo of gunfire rolled across the desert, carried by the wind. The storm is drawing closer, and whispers of Jonah's violent past may soon become prophecy. The sun blazed high over Redemption Ridge when the first signs of trouble arrived, not in the form of gunfire, but of men. 3 drifters rode in on sweating horses, dust caking their coats, eyes sharp as hawks. They tethered their mounts outside the rusty spur saloon, and from the moment their boots hit the ground, the air grew tense. The leader was a wiry man with a scar cutting across his cheek like a canyon. He swaggered into the saloon, demanding whiskey before the barkeep even set eyes on him. His companions, broader and meaner, kicked over chairs and shoved aside patrons with careless cruelty. A hush fell. These were not cowhands. These were the kind of men who carried trouble in their wake. Jonah Steele watched from across the street, Bible in hand. He saw how the townsfolk shrank from the strangers, how fear hung thick as desert heat. He stepped forward, not as the man he once was, but as the man he longed to be. Inside the saloon, Jonah's calm voice cut through the tension. This town welcomes travelers, but it will not suffer bullies. The scarred drifter sneered, whiskey dripping from his beard. And who's to stop us? You, preacher. The word was spat with venom. Jonah held his gaze. His hand did not move toward the weapon he still denied himself, yet his stance carried a warning older than scripture. For a moment the drifter faltered. Something in Jonah's eyes suggested he had faced death before, and walked away. The tension broke only when the drifters laughed, tossing coins on the bar. We'll drink your whiskey, preacher, but I reckon your prayers won't keep what's coming off our backs. They left as suddenly as they had arrived, riding off toward the desert. Jonah watched them vanish, unease gnawing at him. He knew men like that. They were wolves, and wolves never traveled far without a pack. That night, as the chapel candles burned low, Jonah dreamed of blood on the church steps and the sound of 100 hooves thundering closer. 2 days later, the trouble returned. This time it came boiling out of the saloon like a snake strike. The scarred drifter and his companions, drunk and mean, had cornered a young ranch hand barely old enough to shave. A card game gone wrong, accusations of cheating, and suddenly fists were flying. Jonah had been on his way to deliver bread to the widow Harper when he heard the commotion. He dropped the loaf and ran toward the dust cloud, rising outside the saloon. By the time he arrived, the ranch hand was on the ground, blood streaming from his lip, while one of the drifters drew a knife. The crowd that gathered did nothing. Fear kept them rooted, eyes wide but hands idle. Jonah stepped forward. His voice was steady but fierce. "Put it away." The drifter grinned, blade glinting in the sun. "Stay out of this, preacher. Unless you want to bleed alongside him." Jonah's pulse thundered in his ears. For a split second, his instincts screamed. Draw, aim, fire. But he had no gun at his hip, only faith. Still, he moved faster than anyone expected, seizing the drifter's wrist and twisting. The knife clattered into the dirt. A swift kick sent the man sprawling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jonah had not reached for Steele, but the speed of his strike revealed what he truly was. The scarred leader narrowed his eyes, studying Jonah with a predator's suspicion. "You ain't no preacher," he muttered. Jonah helped the young ranch hand to his feet, ignoring the words. Yet the truth was plain. His past had bled through the mask of peace. The whispers that haunted him would now roar like wildfire. As the drifters staggered off, swearing vengeance, Jonah felt the weight of every eye on him, some with gratitude, others with fear. That night, thunder rolled over the desert, not from storm clouds, but from the march of riders approaching Redemption Ridge. The morning sun rose hot and merciless, baking the earth until the air shimmered like glass. On the outskirts of Redemption Ridge, a rancher's boy came tearing into town, horse lathered with sweat, eyes wide with terror. "They're coming," he shouted, sliding off his saddle. "Dozens of them, riders with black flags, guns, and dynamite. I seen 'em camped by Hell's Canyon." The news spread like wildfire. Shopkeepers abandoned their stalls. Mothers gathered their children. The saloon grew eerily silent. Cards half played on tables as men exchanged nervous glances. Jonah Steele stood at the chapel door, watching fear seep into every corner of town. His heart pounded. The gang was no longer rumor. They were real, and they were coming. Sheriff Abel Carter, a stout man with a graying mustache, rode down Main Street barking orders. "Board your windows, keep off the streets." But Jonah could see it in his eyes. Abel was a man of law, not war, and Redemption Ridge had no army. That evening, Jonah walked to the ridge overlooking the desert. The wind howled across the rocks, carrying with it faint echoes, laughter, gunshots, the cry of coyotes, a warning written in sound. He clenched the cross around his neck, whispering, "Lord, give me strength to keep this flock safe." But behind him, the widow Harper's voice cut through his prayer. "Preacher, The people will need more than prayers when those devils ride in. Jonah turned to face her. The fear in her eyes was the same he'd seen years ago, before he laid down his guns. He wanted to promise safety, but the words died in his throat. Down in the valley, torches flickered, like fireflies on the move. The riders were no longer waiting, they were coming. The ground shook before the riders appeared. Hooves thundered like rolling thunder, stirring a storm of dust that swallowed the horizon. By the time they crested the ridge, the town of Redemption Ridge had gathered in terrified silence to witness their doom. At the head of the gang rode Silas McGraw, a towering figure draped in a black duster, his hat shadowing eyes as cold as a rattlesnake's. A scar split his lip into a permanent sneer, and across his saddle was a rifle worn smooth from years of killing. Behind him trailed nearly 30 men, outlaws with pistols on their hips, bandanas covering their faces, and cruelty in their eyes. They thundered into town like a storm, scattering chickens, splintering barrels, and forcing townsfolk to scatter. One outlaw fired shots into the sky, whooping with glee, while another snatched a bottle from the saloon porch and shattered it against the ground. Silas reined in at the center of Main Street. His voice boomed like a preacher mocking God himself. "Redemption Ridge," he shouted. "You're ours now. Pay your tithe in gold, silver, and horses, and maybe, just maybe, you live to see another sunrise." Sheriff Abel Carter stood tall, hand on his revolver. "This is a free town. You'll take nothing but lead." Silas grinned. A single nod and a rifle cracked. The sheriff's hat spun into the dust, and his body followed a heartbeat later, lifeless. The town gasped. Mothers clutched children. Men froze where they stood. And in the shadows near the chapel door, Jonah felt his soul tear. The gang spread like a flood, kicking in doors, dragging folks into the street. Silas dismounted, his boots sinking into the dust beside the sheriff's corpse. He raised his eyes to the chapel. "Preacher," he sneered, "come out and pray for your people." Jonah's hands shook at his sides. He wanted to resist. He wanted to keep the promise he made to God. But in the pit of his soul, he knew this was only the beginning. By dusk, Redemption Ridge was a cage. The outlaws patrolled every street, their horses tied to fences as they claimed the saloon for their own headquarters. Doors were boarded shut from the inside. Windows shuttered, yet screams and crashes broke through the silence whenever the gang took what they wanted. Men were forced into the street at gunpoint, pockets turned inside out. Women carried what little silver or gold they had, hands trembling as they offered it up to McGraw's gang. Resistance was met with blood. In the chapel, Jonah knelt in prayer, but his words felt hollow, drowned by the echo of boots stomping outside. The widow Harper slipped inside, her face pale. "They killed Sheriff Carter," she whispered. "We've got no law left. Folks are saying, they're saying you're the only one who can stop them." Jonah's chest tightened. "I'm no savior. I laid that life down." She leaned closer, voice breaking. "Then pick it back up, Jonah, or we'll all be dead by week's end." Outside, Silas McGraw gathered the townsfolk in the street, his voice carrying like a whip. "Listen close, Redemption Ridge. From this day on, your town belongs to the McGraw gang. Any soul who defies me will hang from that gallows before sundown. Any who hide behind their preacher will burn with him in his chapel." The crowd shivered under his words. Eyes flicked toward Jonah's chapel door. Whispers rose again. Not of faith, but of the gunslinger who once was. Jonah pressed his forehead against the pulpit, heart pounding. His revolver lay beneath the floorboards, waiting, calling. He whispered to the darkness, "Lord, what am I to do? Save my soul or save my people?" A gunshot rang outside, and a man's scream followed. Jonah's prayer broke into silence. Night fell heavy over Redemption Ridge. Lanterns glowed in windows like frightened eyes peering out at the shadows, but no one dared speak too loud. The McGraw gang ruled the streets, their laughter carrying through the still air like the sound of wolves circling prey. Inside the saloon, the outlaws drank deep, gambling with stolen coins. Outside, a young blacksmith named Eli Turner whispered to his neighbors, "We can't just sit here. We need to fight back." But the older men shook their heads. "You've seen what happened to the sheriff. We fight, we die." Eli's gaze drifted toward the chapel, where Jonah Steele knelt in candlelight. "Maybe the preacher," he began, but one of the townsfolk spat in the dirt. "The preacher's a coward, hides behind scripture while we're robbed blind." The words reached Jonah through the chapel's open windows. They cut deep, sharper than any blade. He closed his eyes, gripping the wooden cross until his knuckles whitened. He had once been feared, once been needed. Now he was doubted, despised. From the street came the cruel laughter of Silas McGraw. "Sleep well, folks. Tomorrow we'll collect again, this time from every soul who thinks they can hide their silver." Jonah bowed his head lower. But in the dust outside, Eli whispered again, voice trembling yet steady, "If the preacher won't stand, then I will." The next morning, Jonah found the widow Harper waiting by the chapel steps. Her daughters clung to her skirts, eyes wide with hunger. "They took our cattle," she said softly. "We've nothing left. How long before they take our lives, too?" Jonah said nothing, only offered bread from the chapel stores. But she pushed it away, tears brimming. "Don't you see? Bread won't save us. Prayers won't save us. You were a gunfighter once, Jonah. Folks whisper it, the man with the silver star and the fastest hand west of the Pecos." Jonah froze, the past rushing back like wildfire. The blood, the bodies, the nights haunted by faces he'd gunned down. "I buried that man," he rasped. The widow's voice hardened. "Then dig him back up, or dig all our graves instead." She turned and walked away, her daughters clutching her hands. Jonah stood alone on the steps, the cross heavy around his neck, and heavier still the weight of choice pressing on his shoulders. In the saloon, Silas McGraw barked orders. The gang would ride at sundown, scour the town again, and hang anyone who resisted. The widow's words echoed in Jonah's ears, louder than the outlaw's threats. For the first time in years, he felt the itch in his palm, the itch of a trigger waiting to be pulled. That night, Jonah lit no candles. He sat in darkness, staring at the pulpit, hearing only the ticking of the chapel's clock and the faint laughter of outlaws outside. His hands trembled, not from fear but from memory. Finally, with a deep breath that felt like betrayal, he rose. Each step toward the pulpit was heavy, as though he carried a coffin on his back. He knelt, pried up the floorboards, and there it was, the weapon he swore never to touch again. A Colt .45 revolver, steel polished with time, waiting like a serpent in the dark. Jonah lifted it, and the weight was both foreign and familiar. He spun the cylinder, hearing the click echo through the chapel like a thunderclap. Dust clung to it, but his grip was steady as the days when men spoke his name in fear. He whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for permission. "If I damn my soul to save theirs, Lord, then damn me." The revolver slid into his belt. For the first time in years, Jonah Steele, the gunslinger, had returned. At that same hour, Eli Turner gathered a handful of townsfolk in a barn, whispering of a fight. But they didn't know Jonah was already preparing. And out in the saloon, Silas McGraw raised a toast. "Tomorrow, Redemption Ridge belongs to the dead." The chapel smelled of dust and regret. Jonah sat at the pulpit, the revolver heavy against his side. The cross above him loomed like a silent judge, its shadow long and sharp across the wooden floorboards. When dawn broke, he didn't preach. He couldn't. His sermon that morning was silence. The townsfolk filed in, waiting for words of hope, but Jonah gave them only bowed head and trembling hands. When the congregation left, the widow Harper lingered by the door, her voice low and hard as gunmetal. "They'll come tonight," she said. "If you won't fight for us, at least fight for them." Her eyes flicked to her daughters playing by the steps, unaware of the noose that loomed over Redemption Ridge. Jonah's throat burned, but no words came. He could not promise victory. He could not promise survival. All he could promise was blood. That night he walked the town's edge, staring at the desert horizon painted red with dusk. He whispered the words he had sworn never to say again. "If they come, I'll be ready." Eli Turner worked by lantern light, hammering iron into crude weapons. A pitchfork sharpened into a spear, a length of chain hardened into a flail. He gathered a handful of men, storekeepers, ranch hands, even a boy no older than 16. Their faces were pale with fear, but their eyes were lit with desperation. "We're not soldiers," one man said. "No," Eli answered. "We're not, but we're not sheep either." The barn door creaked open, and Jonah stepped inside. Every head turned. For a moment, no one breathed. He looked at them, scared, trembling, weak in body but fierce in spirit. His gaze fell to Eli, who stood straighter than the rest, fire in his eyes. "You think this will stop them?" Jonah asked, gesturing at the makeshift weapons. "No," Eli admitted, "but I'd rather die fighting than watch my family starve." Jonah studied him, then pulled the revolver from his belt. The steel glinted in the lantern light. Gasps filled the barn. "Then you'll need someone who knows how to kill," Jonah said. For the first time, the people of Redemption Ridge felt something stir within them. Not hope, not yet, but the spark of defiance. In the saloon, Silas McGraw leaned back in his chair, boots on the table, cigar smoke curling around his scarred grin. One of his men stumbled in, hat in hand, sweat rolling down his brow. "Boss, the preacher, he's with them. He's got a gun again." Silas's laughter was a slow, rattling thing, like dry bones shaking. "Well, well, the holy man remembers how to sin." He stood, slamming his boot down so hard the table cracked. His gang looked up from their cards and whiskey. "Let him. I've been waiting to kill a legend." He stepped outside, looking down Main Street. The chapel bell hung silent, but he could almost feel it waiting to toll. His hand brushed the ivory grip of his revolver, custom-made, quick as lightning. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low and venomous, "we burn this town, and I'll put the preacher in the ground myself." The gang erupted in cheers, but Silas's smile never wavered. To him, this wasn't conquest. It was sport. A game. A duel written in blood before the first shot was ever fired. And in the distance, thunder rolled across the desert, though the sky was clear. The townsfolk gathered in the barn again, but this time Jonah didn't come as their preacher. He came as their gunslinger. His coat was shed, his sleeves rolled up, and the revolver at his side gleamed like a serpent waiting to strike. He showed them how to stand, how to breathe, how to aim. The men fumbled, their hands shaking as they tried to mimic his draw. The women, too, some sharper than the men, learned quickly, determination carved into their faces. Even young Eli moved with a steadiness that caught Jonah's eye. "Speed don't matter if you can't hit," Jonah said, his voice low, carrying like scripture in the barn's still air. "And a bullet ain't worth a damn if your heart's too weak to pull the trigger." By lantern light, shots cracked into makeshift targets, buckets, bottles, carved wooden dummies. Every miss was answered by Jonah's steady correction, every hit by his grim nod. But when the widow Harper picked up the revolver, silence fell. Her hands shook at first, but her gaze steadied. She fired. The bottle shattered. She didn't flinch. Jonah's jaw tightened. He had seen killers in his day, and something in her eyes told him she could be one if pushed far enough. The next morning, a scream shattered the town's fragile hope. On the edge of town, 3 bodies swayed from the old oak tree. Ranchers, men who had spoken too loudly about fighting back. Their boots dangled above the dirt, their faces purple in the rising sun. A crude sign swung from a branch. "This is what defiance costs." The townsfolk gathered, horror etched in their faces. Mothers clutched their children close, while men muttered curses under their breath. Some looked at Jonah, their eyes begging, accusing, demanding. Silas McGraw stood across the street, watching with a smile that cut deeper than a knife. His men lounged on their horses, rifles resting casually, daring anyone to make a move. Jonah's fists clenched. He wanted to draw, to end it here, to send Silas to hell with a bullet between the eyes, but he didn't. He couldn't. Not yet. "Bury them," Jonah said finally, his voice low, steady as iron. Silas tipped his hat mockingly. "Preacher," he drawled, "say a prayer for him, will ya? Lord knows you'll be next." The town watched in silence as Silas rode off, dust trailing behind him like smoke from the devil's fire. That night, the sound of gunfire split the air. Jonah raced into the street, revolver drawn. Flames licked at the livery stable, smoke choking the night sky. One of Silas's men lay dead in the dirt, a bullet through his skull. and standing over him, shaking but alive, was Eli Turner, revolver in hand. I, I had to, Eli stammered. He came for me. Jonah grabbed the boy's shoulders, his grip iron. You just lit the fuse, he whispered. Across town, a horn sounded. The outlaws call to arms. Silas McGraw wasn't going to wait for dawn. He was coming now, with hell at his back. The townsfolk scrambled, grabbing what weapons they had. Women herded children into cellars. Men took positions behind wagons and fences. The chapel bell began to toll, not for prayer, but for war. Jonah stood in the center of the street, revolver in hand, the firelight painting him half preacher, half devil. His heart thundered, torn between salvation and slaughter. Then from the darkness, the first outlaw charged into town, pistol blazing. The first shots cracked like thunder, rattling windows and hearts alike. Outlaws poured into Redemption Ridge, their horses kicking up dust as bullets tore into walls and wagons. Lanterns shattered, flames spread, and the once quiet town became a war zone. Jonah moved like a shadow of his old self, quick, ruthless, precise. Each time his pistol roared, an outlaw fell. But the people were no seasoned fighters. Men missed more than they hit, women trembled as their rifles jammed, and children screamed from their hiding places. The widow Harper knelt in the dirt, rifle steady, and put a bullet through a raider's chest just as he raised his gun at Eli. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. Jonah saw it, something breaking inside her, something she might never get back. Silas McGraw rode at the edge of the fray, grinning as he watched chaos bloom. He didn't even draw his gun yet. He was saving that for Jonah. The chapel bell kept tolling, drowning the screams, drowning Jonah's doubts. He shouted orders, rallied men, dragged the wounded to cover. But for every outlaw that fell, another came storming through the night. And then Jonah heard it, a cry of agony. Sheriff Clay, the old lawman, staggered into the street with a bullet lodged in his chest. His badge gleamed in the firelight as he fell to his knees. Jonah dragged the sheriff into cover, blood seeping through Clay's shirt. The old man grabbed his hand, voice ragged. "You're the law now, Jonah. You always were." His eyes went glassy before the words fully left his lips. Jonah closed them with a trembling hand, rage boiling in his chest. Then he heard boots crunching across the saloon porch. A hulking outlaw stepped into the firelight. Silas's lieutenant, Jack Bear Mallory. A monster of a man with a shotgun in one hand and a Bowie knife strapped to his belt. "Preacher," Bear bellowed, "your sermon's over. Time to meet your maker." Jonah stood in the middle of the street, pistol low, eyes burning. "I'll walk you to yours." The two men circled, the saloon windows shattered behind them, flames crackling nearby. Bear fired the shotgun. Jonah rolled, the blast tearing a hole through the dust where he'd stood. Jonah's revolver barked in reply, grazing Bear's shoulder. The townsfolk watched from windows and doorways, too terrified to breathe. This wasn't just a fight. It was the first true duel Redemption Ridge had seen in years. Bear swung the shotgun like a club, smashing Jonah to the ground. The world tilted, ringing in his ears, blood in his mouth. Bear raised the weapon high for the killing blow. Time slowed. Jonah's fingers clawed through the dirt, reaching for his revolver as Bear's shadow loomed over him. The outlaw roared, shotgun descending like judgment from above. Then crack! A shot rang out, not Jonah's. Bear's head snapped back, a red halo bursting into the firelight. He collapsed, the shotgun clattering beside Jonah. Jonah looked up. On the chapel roof stood Eli Turner, rifle in his trembling hands, smoke curling from the barrel. The boy had saved him, but there was no time to breathe. Outlaws screamed in fury, bullets rained harder, and Silas McGraw finally stepped forward, spitting his cigar into the dirt. He tipped his hat, eyes locked on Jonah. "Your flock's getting brave, preacher," Silas drawled. "But sheep don't beat wolves. Tomorrow at dawn, it's you and me. One gun, one bullet. Winner takes the town." The outlaws pulled back, leaving the town burning, bodies in the streets, and silence heavy as the desert night. Jonah knew this wasn't just a challenge. It was the devil himself calling him to the altar. The town smelled of smoke and blood. Fires smoldered, filling the streets with a ghostly haze as the townsfolk worked in silence. They dug shallow graves by lantern light, their shovels striking rock with hollow echoes. The dead, friends, neighbors, kin, were laid to rest beneath the desert sky. Jonah stood apart, watching the boy Eli kneel by one of the mounds. The child's shoulders shook, but he held back his tears, clenching his jaw the way men twice his age did. Jonah knew that look. He had worn it once, when blood first stained his own hands. Inside the chapel, Jonah knelt before the altar, his Bible open, but the words blurred. His hands trembled as he whispered, "Lord, why now? Why test me like this? You called me to lay down my guns. But if I don't pick them up again, innocents die." His voice broke. "How do I serve both you and them?" Outside, the chapel bell groaned in the night wind, tolling softly like a heartbeat. He felt the weight of tomorrow crushing his chest. If he faced Silas, the old gunslinger inside him would rise again. And once that man came back, Jonah feared he would never put him down. As dawn inched closer, Jonah heard footsteps behind him in the chapel. It was Mary Harper, her face lit only by the flicker of the oil lamp she carried. She walked with purpose, her eyes heavy with secrets. "You think you're the only one with blood on your hands, preacher?" she said quietly. She set the lamp down, her gaze unflinching. "Before my husband died, I was the one who pulled the trigger on the man who threatened my children. I buried him myself. Never told a soul, until now." Jonah stared at her, stunned. Mary's voice didn't tremble as she continued. "You preach of mercy, of peace, but some devils don't understand Scripture. They only understand lead." She stepped closer, her hand brushing Jonah's arm, her eyes fierce. "You saved us once. You'll do it again. And if you fall tomorrow, know this. Your God isn't the only one watching. We all are. And we'll carry your fight." Jonah felt something stir in him, a dangerous mix of hope and dread. Mary's words were a mirror, showing him what he'd tried to bury. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a weapon, forged in blood, now called to strike again. The horizon bled with the first light of morning, painting the desert in fire and ash. The townsfolk gathered in silence, forming a ragged circle around the dusty main street. No one spoke. Every breath felt stolen. Every heartbeat thundered like war drums. Silas McGraw stood tall, black hat casting his face in shadow, his spurs jingling with each step. He twirled his pistol lazily, grinning like a man who'd already won. His men lined the rooftops, rifles ready, but silent. This duel wasn't theirs. Jonah stepped from the chapel, Bible in one hand, revolver in the other. His black coat flapped in the morning wind, his boots stirring the dust. The people of Redemption Ridge parted for him as though he were both savior and executioner. Silas tipped his hat. "Well, preacher, guess it's time to find out if heaven favors the righteous or the quickest hand." The sheriff's badge, still stained with blood, glinted on Jonah's chest. He squared his shoulders, eyes locked on Silas. The bell tolled once. The street went still. Hands hovered near holsters. Every soul in Redemption Ridge held its breath. The town held its breath. Dust swirled in the morning light, the air thick with heat and fear. Children clung to their mothers, men shifted uneasily, hands twitching near their own sidearms, though they dared not intervene. The duel was sacred, one man's skill and fate against another's. Jonah's fingers brushed the worn grip of his revolver. His mind slowed, his heartbeat steady, as if God himself had silenced the world for this moment. He heard only the wind whispering through the dry grass and the faint creak of Silas's leather holster. Silas smirked, his gold tooth catching the sun. "I was hoping you'd come around, preacher. Thought you'd lay down that Bible and pick up the iron where it belongs. Guess some men can't escape what they are." Jonah's eyes burned like coals. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the still street. "But I ain't fighting for myself. I'm fighting for them." He nodded toward the townsfolk. The bell above the chapel groaned once more. Hands moved. 2 pistols leapt free. The crack of thunder split the silence. Jonah staggered back, smoke curling from his barrel. Across from him, Silas stood frozen, his grin fading into something dark and hollow. Blood blossomed across his chest as he dropped to his knees, his pistol slipping from his grasp. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, others in sobs of relief. But Jonah didn't hear them. His ears rang with the echo of the shot, his hands still trembling around the gun. His eyes locked on Silas, who was coughing blood, yet smiling through it. Silas wheezed, his voice a broken rasp. "You think this ends with me, preacher? You ain't seen nothing yet. You just lit the fire, and hell's riding straight for Redemption Ridge." The outlaw leader lay in the dirt, his blood soaking into the thirsty ground. The crowd dared to breathe again, though many still clutched their hats, unable to believe what they had witnessed. Jonah's hand trembled as he slid his revolver back into its holster. He had not wanted this fight, yet once more, his past had come alive in the thunder of gunfire. Silas's laughter rattled like broken glass, weak but sharp. "Kill me if you like, preacher, but it won't save them. You can't stop the storm." His eyes, wild and burning, even as death crept in, shifted toward the horizon. Jonah followed his gaze, and his stomach tightened. Far off, a black cloud of riders was moving, a swarm of outlaws riding hard for Redemption Ridge. The townspeople gasped as they too saw the riders. The duel had been nothing more than a spark. Silas had been right. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Jonah dropped to one knee beside the dying man. "How many?" he asked, his voice hard. Silas's grin widened as blood spilled from his lips. "Enough to burn your town to the ground." With that, the outlaw king's head slumped to the side, his last chuckle echoing in the silence. Jonah rose slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the riders thundered closer. He had defended the innocent once, but now a war was coming to his doorstep. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with fire as the riders descended. Dust rose in waves behind them, the earth trembling with the fury of their charge. At their head rode a man Jonah recognized instantly, Caleb Voss, Silas's blood brother, a warlord among outlaws, known for leaving whole towns in ashes. The townsfolk panicked. Mothers screamed for their children, shopkeepers bolted their doors, and the sheriff's deputies looked pale as death. "We can't stand against that many," one muttered. Jonah's jaw tightened. He had laid down his guns once before, and for years he had clung to faith instead of violence. But here, with 100 souls depending on him, the choice was gone. He strode into the chapel, the wooden floor creaking under his boots. Inside, he knelt at the altar, whispering words not of surrender but of strength. His hand hovered over the Bible before sliding instead to the drawer beneath it, where an old revolver lay wrapped in cloth. Jonah unwrapped the iron, its weight both familiar and damning. His reflection in the steel was not of a preacher, but of a gunslinger reborn. Outside, Caleb Voss raised his rifle and fired a shot into the sky, his voice booming over the town. "You killed my brother, now I'll kill your town. At dawn, Redemption Ridge burns." The riders pulled back, camping just beyond rifle range, waiting for the coming sunrise. Jonah stepped out of the chapel, revolver on his hip once more. The people looked to him with desperate eyes. For the first time since laying down his guns, Jonah felt the fire return. The town of Redemption Ridge was swallowed in silence that night. Every lantern glowed faintly. Every hammer strike echoed as men nailed shutters closed and built barricades from wagons and barrels. The women carried water buckets from the well, their faces pale, their eyes darting toward the horizon where campfires of the outlaws burned like hell's own watchfires. Jonah moved among the people, no longer just their preacher, but their protector. He spoke little, but his presence carried weight. Children clung to their mothers, watching the man of God with both fear and hope. He stopped at the saloon, where the sheriff stood hunched over a bottle. "If you're gonna drink," Jonah said quietly, "make it your last. Tomorrow we fight." As midnight came, Jonah slipped away to the edge of town. He knelt in the dust, staring at the stars. His prayers were broken, torn between salvation and blood. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the outlaw camp. Caleb Voss's men were sharpening their knives, loading rifles, and waiting for dawn. Jonah gripped his pistol tighter, whispering, "Lord, forgive me for what I must do." Jonah spun, pistol raised. From the shadows stepped Deputy Harlan, the youngest lawman in town. His face was pale, his hands shaking. I I can't do this, Harlan stammered. They've got us outnumbered 10-1. I told them I'd open the south gate at dawn. Rage flared in Jonah's chest, but beneath it was sorrow. This boy had been raised in Redemption Ridge, baptized in Jonah's own chapel. Now fear had rotted him. Jonah's voice was iron. If you betray this town, you'll be condemning every man, woman, and child. Is that the choice you want written on your soul? Harlan's eyes brimmed with tears. I don't want to die, preacher. He turned, ready to flee toward the outlaw camp. Jonah's hand trembled on his gun. Could he spill the blood of one of his own to save the many? The decision clawed at him, tearing at the thin line between faith and violence. Before Jonah could act, a rifle cracked in the distance. Harlan fell, clutching his chest, dead before he hit the ground. On the ridge above, an outlaw scout whistled, signaling back to camp. The outlaws now knew the town was awake and preparing. The outlaws came sooner than expected. The ground shook as horses thundered in, rifles flashing in the darkness. Flames licked the wooden fences as fire arrows streaked across the night sky. Redemption Ridge was no longer waiting for dawn. It was already at war. Jonah shouted orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hold the barricades! Keep the women and children in the chapel! Bullets ripped through the air, smashing into shutters, sparking against iron stoves dragged into the streets for cover. The sheriff, sobered at last, fought beside Jonah, firing shotgun blasts into the oncoming tide. But for every outlaw that fell, two more came roaring forward. Caleb Voss rode among them, his black duster whipping in the wind, his rifle cracking like thunder. He was a ghost of vengeance, determined to make Redemption Ridge a graveyard. As the night blazed, Jonah found himself face to face with Caleb's riders in the main street. He fought like the gunslinger he once was, each shot a prayer and a curse, his coat torn, his arm bleeding. But for every outlaw he dropped, the weight of his choices grew heavier. He was no longer the man of God his people thought him to be. He was once again the killer preacher. The battlefield cleared as if fate itself demanded silence. Jonah stood in the middle of Main Street, revolver in hand, while Caleb Voss reined his horse to a stop. Their eyes locked, one man fighting for vengeance, the other for redemption. You took my brother, Caleb growled. Now I'll take your town. Jonah's hand hovered over his gun. His breaths were slow, steady, though his heart thundered like the storm. Dust swirled around them, glowing in the red light of burning rooftops. Behind Jonah, the chapel bell tolled, rung by terrified townsfolk who refused to be silent in the face of death. The draw came fast as lightning. Caleb's rifle cracked. Jonah's revolver barked. Sparks lit the air as bullets screamed past. Jonah dove, rolled, and fired again, his shot grazing Caleb's shoulder. The outlaw roared, leaping from his horse, pulling a knife as he charged. The two men collided in the dirt, fists and steel clashing in a storm of rage. Jonah's Bible slipped from his coat, landing in the dust between them, its pages torn and burning from stray embers. He saw it, faith and blood, colliding in the same instant. Caleb raised the knife high. Jonah caught his wrist, teeth gritted, and with a final desperate move, he drove his revolver barrel against Caleb's chest and pulled the trigger. Silence fell over the battlefield. Caleb Voss's body lay lifeless, his grip finally releasing Jonah. The outlaw horde, seeing their leader dead, broke like shattered glass. Some fled into the night, others threw down their weapons, leaving Redemption Ridge standing against all odds. Jonah rose slowly, bloodied, smoke-stained, his revolver heavy in his hand. The townsfolk emerged from the chapel, their eyes wide. To them, he was their savior, but Jonah knew the truth. His faith had been tested not by prayer, but by violence. He had become once more the man he thought he'd buried. The sheriff approached, laying a hand on Jonah's shoulder. You saved us, preacher. You saved everyone. Jonah looked down at the scorched Bible lying in the dust. He picked it up, its pages blackened, and whispered, or damned myself in the process. As dawn finally broke, painting the desert in gold, Jonah walked away from the cheering crowd. His shadow stretched long across the dust. He had defended the innocent, but his soul carried the weight of every shot fired. Whether he would ever find peace again remained uncertain. Jonah rides out into the sunrise, torn between redemption and damnation. The legend of the killer preacher only just beginning. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share for next story.